welcome to the first ever episode of the Science podcast of the German Embassy here in New Delhi. Thanks for tuning in. We approached this episode today with a topic that is not only dire to, I'd say, the policy of the Federal Foreign Office, but which is also still in 2024 a global issue. The topic of the first ever episode of this podcast will deal with the role and contributions of women in science, which I think is still as prominent as ever. So thank you for being part of this. Before I will introduce my wonderful panel, which I have today, let me set the scene a little bit. Let me tell you why we are talking about what we're talking today. I found some numbers, right? So globally, as of now, women still make out only 30% of researchers. This is an average number, of course, and varies from field to field. However, it's an average that doesn't reflect equality. In India, we look at 33% of female researchers, in Germany at 29%, and that actually makes Germany one of the lowest ranks within the EU. Publications authored by men are cited more often by other researchers than papers that are authored by female researchers. And women's needs have been traditionally overlooked in the field of R&I. To give you a couple of examples I recently came across. Crash dummies, until rather recently, only have been fit to male bodies, male proportions, at an average height of men in Germany being at 178 centimeters and an average height for women being at 165 meters, plus a difference in roughly 15 kilos of weight, it led to a disproportional higher number of women being killed in car accidents. So it can get rather serious. On a less serious note, but which I found interesting, and a less scientific note as well. If I talk to the ladies who are listening right now, you may have found yourself at one point or another in a long queue in front of a washroom where your male counterparts pop in and out of the washrooms. I always accustomed this to the fact that maybe women just need longer in the bathroom. However, it's not true. It is due to the fact of architects, architecture being also a male-dominant field. It's due to the fact that architects assign the same amount of space to female and male bathrooms. However, as females, we need toilet stalls, so we need actually more space in order to fit in the equal amount of, spots. So this just to give you a brief overview. We'll talk about more examples later. On the other hand, which I also want to approach, we have some positives. The number of female students in India, for example, has gone up to a percentage of 48%. Equally as high in female teachers, who made out 43%. And also female PhD enrollment in India has doubled in the last couple of years. So this podcast wants to discuss very openly what is the benefit that women researchers bring to the table. Maybe we see that we reached all our goals because the examples I told you are not super recent one. But I think that we will find some leverage for discussion. And in a second step, I would like to discuss the possibilities or the ways in which we need to adapt to get more women into science, into research. I have three wonderful panelists today, which I would like to introduce to you. We have Sarah Iqbal. Sarah is a research manager at the George Institute for Global Health, India, where she assists researchers in navigating funding requirements and publication policies. She has a PhD in biochemistry from Aligarh Muslim University, India, and worked briefly as a postdoctoral fellow on grants advisor at the DBT Wellcome Trust India Alliance before transitioning into her current position. Most recently, she participated in the Humboldt residency program on the theme Knowledge and Power. Welcome, Sarah Iqbal. Thank you that you're here.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much.
And right next to Sarah, we have Amita Chandra. She did her Bachelor's of Science and Master's of Science, and consequently also her PhD at the Banaras Hindu University in Varanasi. Thereafter, she went to the Max Planck Institute for Solid State Research in Stuttgart, Germany, as an Alexander von Humboldt postdoctoral fellow. On returning to India, she joined as a faculty member at the Punjab University in Chandigarh. She was the first Humboldt ambassador scientist to India from 2006 to 2012 and DAAD research ambassador from 2014 to 2022. Her research interests are in ion conducting composites, fractal growth, chaos in electrochemical systems, and ion track-based electronic devices. Since 2004, Amita has been teaching physics at the Delhi University Department of Physics and Astrophysics. Very pleased to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we have Lavish Bhandari, President and Senior Fellow at the Center for Social and Economic Progress, CSEP. Dr. Bhandari has published widely on subjects related to sustainable livelihoods, industrial, economic and social reforms in India, economic geography and financial inclusion. He received his PhD in economics from Boston University, for which he was awarded with the best thesis in international economics. He has taught economics at Boston University and IIT Delhi. Currently, he is conducting research on issues of inclusion, India's energy transition, and how it will impact the government as well as the economy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be.
Amita, I would like to start with you and just ask you about your early career days and your journey towards your days today. Let me bluntly ask you, how many female students were there in your classes when you first started out? As a student and maybe as a teacher also.
So as a student of bachelor's in BSc in physics with physics honors at Banaras Hindu University, I was one student with 400 boys in my class and no female professors. Then in master's, subsequently in the mid-80s, I had 8 female colleagues in that class, in a class of 65, which was roughly 12%,
not much.
And no female professors. In PhD, which I got in 1993, in a batch of 15, in a group of 15 in the laboratory, we were 2, and which was still better than many other labs, which was 13%. But as a teacher, when I started teaching in 1999, after my postdoctoral experience, I had about 40% female students in my class, and about 10% of the faculty was female. And now in 25 years, I have more than 50% female students in my master's in physics classes, and about 23% of my colleagues are female. So it is a consistent growth, and it's a slow and steady growth. And especially because of the physics departments being departments where females were thought that they would not be going by the society, by the family, and in general. So, but other departments have a better profile than us. Other science departments like botany, zoology, life sciences always had a better profile in terms of female faculty.
But is there a certain point that women tend to drop out though? I mean, 50% in the lecture hall is great, but you know, we're talking about a glass ceiling maybe or something. Can you confirm that?
I don't think there is a glass ceiling. There are different social reasons for dropping out. Number one, in a traditional society like us, at the age of 23, 24, girls tend to get married, and that is one reason that they drop out. Because then they have children, and then there are when you have children and you want to work, there has to be a support at many levels. Support of family first, support of society next, support of the system where you work there. That means a gradual change is required at all these levels and to prevent this dropout. And another major reason is that many people, girls, especially girls who take up physics or any other science subject in their masters, they drop out later after masters because they go into school teaching.
Okay, interesting.
Yes, that's a very done thing in India. They take up other jobs. Few of them, of course, are very dedicated. They stay in the field, but the others tend to take up other jobs like bank jobs, like majorly school teaching in physics, and therefore the dropout is almost 50%.
So that's not the point where we want to be. I see a lot of growth, maybe. Maybe, Sarah, you can give us a little bit of perspective in, you being a research manager, how it is in funding. We see we have lower numbers of female researchers. Does that reflect, or is being reflected also in the funding? Like, basically the question I want to ask, do women apply less often and get fewer funds, or would you not be confirming that?
So my response will, I'd just like to add on to what Amita said, and the response will be a little layered in that sense. I agree with what she's mentioned about women dropping out after completing their PhD programs, but then the question is, do they really want to, or is that because of lack of support structures that will help them in getting more funding for the kind of research that they want to do? And with respect to your question regarding availability of funding opportunities, I would say that funding opportunities are available, but it's the time when people take a career break. That's the very crucial window that Amita was talking about. And then when they come back, they find it harder to assimilate into the workforce and the work culture. The funding organizations, it's not that they don't know about it, and they have actually come up with schemes that help researchers or women join the research force back. But then I would say that these are ad hoc programs. They allow you to apply for one specific project, but is that enough to build a critical mass after which they can be employed in a institution? That is again something that we need to look into. And things are not so bad. Like you mentioned, there are 33% women already in academia. Of course, we would want this number to go up. People have looked at ways, but yeah, there's way more that can be done at the individual level, at the organizational level, and also at a policy level.
I would like to, before we discuss the maybe changes that need to be done to bring more women on the table, I would like to ask you, Lavish, with your background, if you can think of anything special that women bring to the table. Like basically, I want to explore, do we even need this discussion anymore? Because we're in 2024, like we have a couple of numbers, we see that we didn't reach equality, but why actually do we want to reach equality? Maybe you can think of something.
That's a loaded question, but let me just start by saying, in my life, at least in the last 25 years, I've just seen a complete overhauling of the workforce in the research space in my domain. I could not have imagined what I'm seeing today. And to just very briefly, today when we go and hire, it's difficult to get males. We are the quality of women that we're getting. We are rarely getting comparable males. So in fact, in our domain, which is in the policy space and which covers economics, engineering, energy, foreign policy, international relations, and so on, there is no comparison. So in a sense, perhaps you might feel that it's no longer an issue. But actually there still is. The reason why this is happening, I feel, is to a very large extent because our practices have changed. Hybridization of work has really empowered women unlike anything else that I could ever have imagined. It's not so much the salaries, it's not so much the changing societies, and all of that is happening. But what has really happened is that it has just freed up women from the hegemony of that 9 to 5, very stringent control kind of a job, and which has allowed many young women to not only enter the workforce, but to think about entering the workforce. Right? So I think that has been one major change that has happened. But hybridization does not happen by itself, and it may need not continue, as we are seeing in some of the sectors such as IT. It will only continue if there's a conscious policy to continue it. So I think it's really important for institutions, for organizations to be cognizant of the fact that a lot of what is happening today is an outcome of their perhaps inadvertent actions. Right? So that's one major. The other part, are women different? Absolutely. I find that women researchers are very different from male researchers. It may not be politically correct to say this, but it actually is. In my experience, it has been very true. The one major difference, women, I feel, tend to be far more introspective. So if something is not happening, a lot of times they go within rather than go outside. A typical male researcher may find fault with this issue or that issue and here on. A typical female, and I'm talking about typical, and of course there are exceptions, tends to, is there something that I'm not doing right? And that's a major difference. I think that's one. What I also feel is that women tend to build far more stress for themselves, within themselves. Okay? So I think it is important to recognize this. At least I recognize this, and I feel it is organizations need to build that in their practices of interacting with their staff and so on. Well, of course, I could go on, but I think these two are critical differences which need to be appreciated, and you need to work at it.
No, thank you. And can you correlate this to any scientific outcome in research? Because I remember I read that women are basically prone to be better agents for the fight against climate change, because they tend to, we talked about, maternal instinct in some way. We tend to care about more of those things. You talked about, women tending to be more introverted in that respect. Can you think of anything, or can you confirm that, or either not?
I must confess, I didn't think of it this way. I myself, being a male, feel that the environment is really important, and I don't think that women are any more or less oriented towards the environment. What I do feel happens is that the men have been drawn to traditional areas of work. Okay, I'm in the IT domain, I'm in the accounting domain, I'm in XYZ domains. The environment is something which is very new that has come up.
Yeah.
So I think that this new window that opened, or rather the new door that opened, and women who are entering the workforce, or rather this space, tend to get into this far more. So you may feel that women are far more likely to be in the environment space.
Yeah.
But on that issue, I don't think there is a difference. Of course, they bring different characteristics to that same topic, but I think women are as likely to be impacted. Now, having said that, I must also confess that I come from the environment activism space. Before I was doing research, and there it's mostly women now that you say it. And I never thought of it that way until today. So I'll have to come back to you on that one.
Feel free.
Yeah, I personally think, just adding on to what you said a little while ago, that women bring new perspective, but they also lend visibility to the issues that women are facing that men would not have maybe recognized. So in the space of health research, sexual and reproductive health issues are being researched upon by women. They bring in a new perspective. In the space of endometriosis, I think endometriosis research has taken up just in a couple of years, and it's basically women who bring those issues to the fore as opposed to men, because they're not facing that problem. And you mentioned environmental health and also climate change and environment. I read it somewhere that because women live in a society, in a community, they understand the issues that the community is facing because of environmental changes, and they bring that aspect to the research table. So I think the ways in which we approach a problem can be slightly different just by the virtue of how we work with people.
Yeah.
But in terms of methodology, training, I wouldn't say there is a difference.
But just widen, the perspective maybe. Yeah, that's interesting. You were mentioning special schemes already. And we were talking about, support systems or just the ecosystem where we live in. What would you think, maybe Amita can answer first, what needs to change to kind of close this? I also read the interesting phrase of a leaky pipeline, to close this, crack where women tend to pause far out of the grid. What needs to change to reach equality in research in your field?
One, I think the reason, leaky pipeline might be valid in some cases, but in most cases, the reason is very valid. A mother with young children, I don't believe is free mentally to work in a laboratory unless she is provided with facilities to check on the child at regular intervals, unless the co-workers at the place of work are supportive of her going for 5-minute breaks like a man takes a cigarette break or a washroom break or a coffee break. This should be allowed. This freedom should be allowed. And even if a female researcher decides to leave the field of science, pure science, and do something else, that should also be very welcome. I don't think it's a leaky pipeline. I think it just needs some systemic improvements.
Can I respond to that?
Of course.
So, in terms of, she just mentioned that if people leave active research, it should not be considered a leaky pipeline. And what I'd like to say is that there are other fields that I think are a part of the research and development ecosystem that we're talking about. So people on the side of funding agencies who help in figuring out the gaps in funding programs and facilitating funding for research. Research managers like myself who work within institutions and work very closely with researchers in bringing in new funding and also doing good science, setting up policies, institutional policies. And in addition to that, science communicators who sort of bridge the gap between science and society, taking the findings, making it more palatable for the community and sharing it widely with the community, also belong to the ecosystem. And I would like to consider them as well as examples of women in science. Having said that, I do think that research institutions can do way more to support women researchers and researchers from different backgrounds, marginalized communities as well. Flexibility is one thing that definitely needs to be built into the research culture. I also believe that there should be support structures for young mothers to be able to work in a way where they are also able to care for their family but also continue their work. And these are just some examples that a couple of institutions within India are doing. So there is merit in learning from them and scaling these solutions to other organizations. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to come back to what you said, Lavish, that in your realm, I take it it's economics basically, or social science maybe in a whole, you have a higher amount of women researchers than male researchers.
Amongst the younger rates.
Amongst the younger, okay. But it goes in a direction of something I read. I initially stated that male publications tend to be more often published in other publications than female publications. However, in the media, female researchers are quoted more often. Do you have any thoughts on that? Any explanations also for the reason that you are ranking such good numbers?
I have no idea on that, but this is absolutely true, including social media. If a woman writes an article, it is far more likely to get higher hits than when a male writes it. Now, don't ask me why that happens, but it does tend to happen.
But does it align with any underlying policy? I can just give you an example for what the Foreign Office does. We introduced the feminist foreign policy a couple of years ago, which is an underlying policy for everything we basically do, special regards of conflicts and negotiations. For example, we try to bring in an equal amount of women who negotiate things, who are part of conflict resolution, and so on. And that leads to the fact that we have more female voices, more representation. Was there anything introduced in India you can think of?
So no, not specifically. Though I must say that a lot of the funders these days are insisting on greater representation of women, at least in their panels and amongst the researchers as well. I feel that while they might do that, it's just a matter of time. The way the age segments are, is just another 5-10 years, at least in my space, which is policy, economics policy, that whole space, that women will be actually the majority. They are not currently, yes. And it's but natural, because amongst the older age segments, this is not the case. And that was, at that time, there were fewer women who were in this space. So I don't particularly support this, because it does tend to, because many of the women, if you force them to be up, let's say in many of these panels or in researchers, may not be adequately prepared. So you are actually dumbing down the conversation or the research, etc. Let's just wait. It won't take too long. In my space, at least, it won't take too long. Because right now I'm seeing women in their 35s and 40-year-olds. These are not early career women, right? They're mid-career women who will definitely remain in the workforce afterwards as well. They will be taking over.
I mean, you've seen steady progress in the last few years, what you told us, Amita.
Yeah. So if the women were stuck at this 25 age segment, and we know what happens after that, then yes, absolutely. You would still need to give it some sort of support. I think what has really happened is that post-childbirth, you are now seeing definitely far more women entering back than you used to when I was younger. I must confess, that's a major change that has happened. To some extent, it may be hybridization, it may be the social norms, it may be the need for two incomes, whatever it might be, but that is definitely happening. And as long as that happens, I just see it's just a matter of time before you will see leadership positions being at least proportionately occupied by women.
So it has to go, the natural way, some sort of. Salvador, you looked like you wanted to respond.
Yeah, but I'll let Amita respond and then maybe I can comment.
No, that's fine. Please go.
Yeah, because I disagree. I would like to see...
I want discussion.
Great. I disagree. I would like to see more people... I mean, it can also be like an age thing, maybe, because you've seen that transformation and I haven't seen that transformation. What I'm looking at is lesser representation of female in decision-making committees. Despite them being a part of the senior research workforce as well. So I think we need to, and again, including them in the decision-making committees is not going to dumb down the discussion or the discourse. It's only going to bring a new and fresh perspective, which maybe was lacking in certain sectors. I also feel that female voices have been historically unheard. So it's a possibility that there is no critical mass of academic knowledge in that specific area, and you may think it's not important or necessary, but it is. It is very important to include those issues in decision-making panels and tables now for those issues to be taken up and acted upon in the future. It's a case of what I see when I hear about when I hear discussions on including voices from the global south in editorial boards and decision-making panels. People say it will happen naturally, and that they look at the critical mass of knowledge before including them in those panels. But I think there's a need to include them on those panels because the issues that they're dealing with are not being heard at the global table. And I think that that sort of analogy fits in this discussion as well. We need to ensure that there is female representation in decision-making committees. Maybe they can tell you what are the issues that females face. the way you define excellence is different. Maybe you're just looking at the number of papers. Maybe a woman sitting on the panel may say that, hey, look, the number of papers don't matter. Maybe we need to look at some other aspects that this person has achieved. And that, again, diversity brings in fresher perspective and can help us arrive at different solutions. And that would be my response to that. But very interested in hearing what you have to say.
Contrary to what you said.
Yes.
I think that you don't need to bring them, they are there. And they bring their inputs as an individual, not as a male, female. So each member of the panel or a committee or a funding agency subgroup has a perspective that this university or this institution is a very remote area, we must support it. Or this place, people have suffered long enough, let us support this. And that doesn't have to do with a gender issue, a gender's point of view. This is just an individual's point of view, in my opinion. And I have seen things change enough because she's too young to observe a change, because she's the next generation, that women are there. So, and regarding other things, changes are happening and at a faster pace than they were happening for my generation, which is a very good thing. But I don't think we have to force upon anything, except that be a little more sensitive to the needs, even to needs of a male worker. I mean, it's not only a female worker's need, I mean a male worker's need. I mean the pressures that men undergo and that I have to be the breadwinner, that is enough pressure for them as well. So I think changes are happening and visible to me.
There's one more thing I'd like to add. We forget that, it's not easy to get, at least in the research space, good quality researchers. So you're constantly searching for good quality researchers. So if there is a woman who's good, she will generally today at least be found. Now, I'm not saying there is no gender bias. Of course, there would be, and different areas would have more or less. In social sciences, there may be less than in hard sciences. I wouldn't know. Because in social sciences, typically there have been more women than there may have been in the hard sciences. But you are looking for women all the time. It's just as you're looking for men, because researchers are not easy to find. Second, I think there is the biggest problem happens at organized, more than these kind of supports. It's the informal, the intangible, intangible support mechanisms that organizations need to be sensitive to. And these you can't just say, okay, fine, you're on this committee. I mean, that doesn't help. It's that when she comes with a problem, how are you going to deal with it? Are you going to share it with the whole office, or are you going to keep it private? There are no rules here, because some may want it to be shared, some may not want it to be shared, some may want it to be I just want a ear to hear, and so on and so forth. And many men, most organizations are not used to this, at least in the workspace. Now, this is what we need to really work upon. I feel that, I'm much older now, but I think it been great if someone had sensitized me to many of these things. I mean, I've just learned from the process of just, exposure to certain situations. Sure. So I would actually work a lot on this part of it, the subtle, the intangibles, the intangibles of it. That I think is very important.
And also, what I said before, maybe representation matters. Female voices being there matters.
No, of course.
But I get that, Sarah, me being from one generation, no offense, but maybe also we have to learn some patience in this regard. We will see.
Yeah, that's right. But again, just like we have now started at least considering that young voices also matter, and we've started taking their perspective in a lot of the things that we do, agenda setting, etc. Similarly, even if they are junior members, their voice does matter. But then happy to agree with you that let's be patient and see what happens.
And it's interesting to find out that there is not the one solution. I mean, it's a comprehensive problem. We discussed, it not only entails women, it's also, important to get men back on the table on this discussion. They're part of it. So there cannot be the one uniform answer to a problem that's that comprehensive, and maybe that's something to conclude this round.
So I would just like to say that I'm glad, and I'm really glad that you invited me into this discussion. Thank you.
Of course.
This is a conversation that needs to happen. It needs to be explicit, and it needs to happen within organization and outside organizations. Just believing that because things are moving in a certain direction, that they will continue to, that's not going to happen. You need to support this process.
Yes. Systemic changes have to be.
But I do feel, and I'll again go back, is that, the intangible issues, the things which are just in behavior, the small things, they actually matter far more than the large, legal changes, or, you hit the checklist, or have you done this, A, B, and C. And that can only happen with sensitization and just repeated sensitization. So as organizations, within the organization and outside, that's something that we all need to keep on aspiring towards.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Amita. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Lavish, for being part of this first ever episode of the Science Podcast of the German Embassy here in Delhi. To the audience, thanks for tuning in. There will be more episodes coming, so maybe leave us a subscription. We will hope that you tune in again soon. Thank you, and bye-bye.